Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for being with us tonight. As the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence approaches, we're hearing more and more about events planned by the administration and other organizations for the celebrations on that very special day. I think it's safe to say that most don't understand it for what it really was and not what we have been led to believe over the years. It was not the declaration of a single nation claiming its place among the nations of the world after giving the reasons why that separation was justified. It was the joint declaration by 13 sovereign and independent states that outlined their reasons for declaring independence from Great Britain. When the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, each state was identified in that document as free, sovereign, and independent. Fighting preceded the declaration by over a year in Lexington and Concord, as well as Bunker Hill. Some states had already issued their own declarations of independence prior to the 4th of July, 1776. It is still a very important date and should be understood correctly. The declaration, as I said, was a joint effort, but the states were originally separate, sovereign, and independent states. One of the early events that ultimately led to separation from England was the Stamp Act, passed by the British Parliament on March 22nd, that was yesterday, 261 years ago, 1765, to help pay for British troops stationed in the colonies during the 7 Years' War. The act required the colonists to pay a tax represented by a stamp on various forms of papers, documents, and playing cards. It was a direct tax imposed by the British government without the approval of the colonial legislatures and was payable in hard-to-obtain British sterling rather than colonial currency. Further, those accused of violating the Stamp Act could be prosecuted in vice admiralty courts, which had no juries and could be held anywhere in the British Empire. Descriptions of the Stamp Act that appear in American textbooks usually summarize the items subject to the tax and focus on how small the tax was. But the Stamp Act was a piece of legislation with 42 specific citations and at least 63 additional clauses and statutes related to collection of taxes, enforcement policies, and penalties for noncompliance. Sounds like a modern mess, doesn't it? In response to the Stamp Act, in some cases there were violent attacks against the tax collectors of the Stamp Act. On October 27th, delegates from 9 colonies met in New York to decide on a unified response to British taxes. At this Stamp Act Congress, as it was known, the delegates issued a Declaration of Rights asserting that it's inseparably essential to the freedom of a people and the undoubted right of Englishmen that no taxes be imposed on them but with their own consent, given personally or by their representatives. Many colonial merchants agreed not to import British goods, applying pressure by pinching the profits of British merchants and manufacturers. Aided by British merchants, who then petitioned the King and Parliament to rescind the taxes, members of the colonial resistance persuaded the new British ministry to repeal the Stamp Act. My point is that not only did the colonies protest, but they took action to nullify the law, standing on the principle that Parliament did not have the right to tax them. Parliament, however, then passed the Declaratory Act, insisting that it had the right to legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. And later they passed the Townshend Acts, which were even worse. The Declaration was in many ways the ultimate act of nullification. So many people today in our country, especially elected officials, lawyers, and judges, and others, denounce nullification and secession, for that matter, as unconstitutional and unpractical. But the founding generation gave no indication that nullification ended after the war was won or after the Constitution was written. And contrary to the lie we are told by many, though not all in the lawyer/politician class, nullification, in fact, has been used successfully throughout our history. In fact, it was expected and used as an argument by those that supported the Constitution to calm the fears of the anti-federalists that oppose ratification. Our guest today is well versed on this topic and all things constitutional. Joe Wolverton III, J.D., an author of several books on the founding of our country and currently the constitutional scholar for the John Birch Society. He will be with us in just a minute. But first, it's time for the Informer Report. As the war in Iran continues and threatens to escalate, including the possible use of ground troops, I want to go back to the issue of war powers. The Democrats' recent concern over congressional power to declare war and some of the GOP, we know that a lot of that concern is just because Trump is the president. They didn't show the same concern when Obama or Clinton were in office. But forget the politicians for a minute and forget Trump and the current situation, whether you agree with his decision or not. Forget what you have been told that Thomas Jefferson supposedly did in the Barbary Wars with the pirates, or what people have told you about the War Powers Act, which many of you have obviously never read. What have you read about it? More importantly, what have you read about the debates from the Constitutional Convention and the state ratifying conventions on this issue? Given the current situation, how do you distinguish when it crosses over into a war that Congress is required to declare and a war that the president can, as commander-in-chief, wage on his own? What's the criteria? How far can he go on his own? And by the way, other than Article 2 saying he is the commander-in-chief, have you noticed that it doesn't define any specific powers to wage offensive war or to commit acts of war? If only Congress can declare war, how can the president be allowed to commit acts of war? I'm not talking about defensive actions here where our forces have been attacked and are repelling an attack. No question there in my mind that not only can individual forces return fire, but the president could authorize or possibly even pre-authorize forces to respond to attacks in order to repel the attack. I'm talking about taking offensive action, especially preemptive offensive action. And remember, the enemy always gets a vote, so you can't necessarily say it's going to be a limited response. Declaring that we are going to fight some limited war doesn't mean the enemy is going to go along with our timetable. What if we underestimate an enemy or overestimate our own capabilities? Do you think the founders intended for one man to get us involved in a war? That's what kings did, and why they were opposed to the decision being left to one man. Our founders opposed that. They talked about it. They talked about it in the Constitutional Convention, and I'm sure in the ratification debates as well. That was one of the reasons they didn't want to repeat the creation of a monarchy. They did not want one man making that decision. So when does Congress get involved? Do they only have the power to defund something that the president has started? And I'm not talking about just this president. I'm talking about any president, especially the presidents since the end of World War II, which World War II was our last declared war. And none of those undeclared wars have really turned out good, have they? One last thought. We have been in the nuclear age for 80 plus years. We had a 50 plus year Cold War with the Russians, who were admittedly more sane than the Iranian regime. Do we want one person to decide the protocol for dealing with nuke-armed crazies, or should there be an established response in those situations? Keep in mind, our recent attacks have been based on intel that Iran would have nuclear capability in the near future. Whether any of that is reliable information, I can't say, but I'm not sure one person should get to decide all the parameters. Imagine Biden and his handlers being relied on to stop a nuclear attack from Iran. Just something to think about that we as a country need to consider, no matter who is in the White House or what party. And that wraps up this installment of the Informer Report. If you have a news story that you want to alert us to, be sure to send us an email at tninformer.tv@gmail.com. And now a word from our sponsor, LifeWave, a unique product that uses light reflection to activate the body's own natural energy, supporting healing, improving performance, and combating aging without drugs or stimulants. Check it out, and we'll be right back with our guest, Joe Wolverton.
Light, the energy of life itself. Since the beginning of time, light has sustained us, fueled our growth, and shaped the world. Even Einstein recognized that everything we are is made of light. But what if we could harness the light within us, not just to live, but to renew, restore, and rejuvenate? Introducing LifeWave X39, the first product in the world that activates stem cells using our body's own light. Backed by clinical research, multiple patents, and over 10 years of stem cell research, a revolutionary wearable light technology that unlocks the power of activating our own stem cells with a single, safe, affordable, non-transdermal patch that puts you back in control of how you look, feel, and perform. Unlike drugs or chemicals, X39 works naturally, awakening your body's ability to heal and thrive. It's time to unlock your full potential, restore your vitality, and embrace a healthier, more vibrant you.
Welcome back to the show. And now to our guest, Joe Wolverton. Joe, thanks so much for being with us again tonight. How are you doing?
Dave, it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm doing fine, brother. How are you doing?
Doing great. Any new projects you're working on?
Well, yeah, I'm working on this second edition of The Founder's Recipe, which is that book that I wrote some, 15 years ago. I'm working on a second edition of that. I'm writing a biography of Algernon Sidney, and we're about to start selling an entirely new edition of None Dare Call It Conspiracy, updated for 2026 with a new foreword that I wrote. And for the first time in paperback, and it's going to sell for about $5, Dave. And for the first time in paperback, the index and footnotes will be included. So you're going to say, if you go on Amazon and look up None Dare Call It Conspiracy in hardback, talking $40, $50, $80. And so I'm the head of Western Islands Publishing, and we're going to give it to you for about $5, and we're going to include the index and a forward updating it. But yeah, get involved in all that. But can I say something off the top that not necessarily our subject, but I heard you talking about it in your Informer report.
Yep.
First of all, is letters of marque and reprisal.
Yep.
Congress has the authority to issue letters of marque and reprisal, meaning they can authorize private citizens to take out somebody that is causing us an imminent threat.
Yep.
We never use these, but that's because Congress doesn't want to do anything that they're supposed to do. They don't want to do anything that will that will require them to be accountable to the people.
Yep.
They can point to the president and say, well, he messed this up, he messed that up. But I want your listeners, if you have your copy of your Declaration of Independence, Constitution, this is ours that we sell at the John Birch Society. I'd encourage you to get ours. The letters of marque and reprisal, why don't we use them?
Yeah.
We should. Congress should use them. And if we did, we wouldn't have to worry about dictatorial presidents.
Yep.
Simple as that.
Absolutely.
The second thing, war powers. Everyone listening / watching this podcast should do themselves a huge favor and read James Madison's Helvidius Papers. Don't delay. As soon as you're finished watching us, go to your Google machine and type in Helvidius, Helvidius Papers by James Madison, and he will set you straight on war powers and the president. And if you don't want to take the word of the Constitution and James Madison, then you're not going to take anybody's word. So I'm done trying to argue with you. If the Constitution and the father of the Constitution ain't enough for you, I'm done.
Absolutely.
But just wanted to say that about the stuff you were speaking about.
Yeah.
But we can talk about the nullification. Go right ahead.
Okay.
So that's what I'm up to.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate you hitting on that, and probably have you back on maybe and we'll just do one on war powers. And understand, this is not about Trump. This is just in general. I mean, everybody knows, well, we haven't declared war since World War II. But that doesn't mean we haven't been in wars, and the people involved in those couldn't tell any difference if they were declared or not. So I'm just trying to understand here why most of us accept that the president can put us in those situations that are open-ended situations. And it's just, it doesn't make sense based on what's written and based on a reading of our history. I mean, and you don't have to be a professor. I mean, I read this stuff and figured it out that, hey, look, something's not right here. So anyway, but we'll do that another show.
I'll just tell you, Dave, that bullet doesn't know if there's a war or an operation. That bullet that just went through your brain doesn't know the difference.
Yep.
That missile that lands on a building and kills everybody inside doesn't know the difference between a declared war and an undeclared war. So
right, absolutely.
Anyway.
So back to nullification, something you're very well versed on. Mm-hmm. And I think we talked about this, I guess, offline. It seems strange to me that we celebrate the 4th of July every year, accept without question, but we accept it, though. We celebrate that, but we accept without question a federal government even more controlling and tyrannical than the British ever attempted to be for at least the last 100 years. And like I say, last 100 years. So this is not about Trump. This is about everybody. And really, I could go back further than 100 years easily, but we'll leave it at that for tonight.
I mean, George III is somewhere saying, and you went to war with me, and look at this, right? He's like, why did y'all start shooting at us? And there's nobody doing anything about this nonsense. And the fact is, Dave, that if nullification is a radical thought, then the entire American Revolution was radical. And I would say from beginning to end, but before it even started. Like you mentioned, the Tea Act, the Townsend Acts, the Stamp Act, all of them were nullified. I mean, the fact that the Stamp Act was dead on arrival because the colonies and the municipalities refused to enact it. It was a dead letter when it got here, and it was immediately nullified by Parliament because it had first been nullified by the American colony. They're like, we're not having it. And they manfully resisted it.
Yep.
And the Parliament's like, well, we got to get rid of this or we're going to have trouble. Yeah. Well, they had trouble anyway because they ended up with the Townsend Acts and the Tea Act and all of those things.
But they did the Declaratory Act before that, right? Basically, after they repealed the Stamp Act.
That's right.
But they said, we reserve the right to legislate for you on anything whatsoever.
Yep, in all cases whatsoever. Now, the problem with this that most people don't understand is that we had a constitution for the colonies, and that was called the Magna Carta. So by King George refusing to allow us representatives in Parliament, he violated sections 2 and 60 of the Magna Carta. And that's what our founding fathers said when they would say, you have violated the Constitution. They didn't mean the Constitution of the United States. It wasn't around. They meant the Constitution of the United Kingdom, which was Magna Carta.
Right.
And that violated sections 2 and 60. Section 2 said no taxation without representation. And section 60 said that these rights are extended to all Englishmen and to all of their descendants wherever they may be found throughout the entire earth. That included us.
And there were other British laws, other British unwritten an unwritten constitution. Actually, I think we had this discussion before. It is actually written. It's just written in different places. So they were violating aspects of those other documents as well. If you want to hit on some of those,
violating well, I mean, what are you talking about? They were the documents that they were violating. Oh, you're talking about like the Bill of Rights, the British Bill of Rights.
Yes.
Yeah, and that also reflected the Magna Carta's protection for no taxation without representation. That no act of Parliament could be done without the representation of the people, and in our case, we had no representation. Right. So we had the British Bill of Rights, which is the big one. The Declaration of Rights. That's the other big one. Between Magna Carta and the Declaration of Rights, we were covered. But George III in Parliament decided, what are they going to do about it?
Right.
And let's not get it twisted. The reason that George III in Parliament imposed these acts on the American colonies is because he had run up the national debt of England, and he needed some way to repay that. And he thought, well, I've got a cash cow over in America. I might as well, bleed them dry. Problem is, we just didn't sit by and let it happen.
Right. I think the more independent-minded people were in the colonies versus still in England. So.
Oh, of course. That for however that happened, be it from the content of the character of the colonists. We descended from people who were already fed up in England, whether it be Jamestown or Plymouth. We descended from those people who were already fed up. They should have been able to recognize that, but they didn't. But every one of this is what you said it, and I don't get it. Every one of these acts of Parliament were nullified. And on July 4th, we celebrate the nullification by the colonists of all these acts. Yet today we say, well, John Calhoun came up with it. No, he didn't. The Civil War, no, not at all.
Yeah.
These things were not invented in the Civil War and not created by John Calhoun.
Yeah. So that it's a nullification document slash a secession document.
The Declaration of Independence was a secession document, period.
Yeah,
Period.
absolutely. So now, going a little further, nullification wasn't anticipated and expected by the founders?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this was a guaranteed right that the founders reserved to themselves and then, enshrined in the Constitution, right? There was no question. I mean, this is why it's so important to read this book, The Founder's Recipe, is you will see the people that the founders read and informed their understanding of government. They all said that a people who are not represented and their will is not represented by the laws, that law is not a law and should not be enforced. So we learned that. I mean, that's as early as Algernon Sidney in the 1600s saying that law is not just and it ought not be observed. Simple as that. Yeah. I mean, it was mother's milk to them, the idea that without the consent of the governed, you had only one other source of power, and that was force. Yeah. And so the government forcing you to do something was not the same and was not lawful.
Yeah. And the other thing about that, too, that it seems like we've totally divorced ourselves from this, yet we want to celebrate. And I know I already kind of said that, but I just don't understand how you could just if you just read the basic story of the revolution, and the War for Independence, I don't see how that people don't get that. I mean,
the colonists did not ask George III's permission to not obey these tyrannical acts. They denied his authority on principle. Yeah. You do not have the authority to issue these edicts, and you can do that all day long and try to enforce them in England, but we are going to stand up for our rights as Englishmen, as enshrined in the Magna Carta, and we are going to refuse to obey unconstitutional act of the government. Because if we don't consent, you're left with one avenue, and that is force. So we're going to refuse to enact them. If you come over here, we are going to forcefully reject your force.
Right. And any law, I mean, even like a good law that's passed, if it's not enforced, it's not worth the paper it's written on. So that works with the people in regards to the Constitution. It's fine to say, well, this isn't constitutional. But if you're not willing to actually fight that, and when I say fight that, I'm not saying, okay, it's time to pick up the gun. It may eventually be that way, but I'm saying you're not left with, okay, we're going to fight this. We're going to go grovel before the court.
Right. And that's the thing. They did not do that, right? They took it upon themselves because it was an act of the right of all Englishmen to refuse to cooperate with unconstitutional edicts. And so they took it upon themselves to refuse to enforce these imperial edicts. That, Dave, and all your listeners, that is nullification in practice. This republic exists because of nullification. And if you don't like it, lump it. I don't care. But if it wasn't for nullification, there wouldn't be a Boston Tea Party. If there wasn't for secession, there wouldn't be a Declaration of Independence, period. And if that bothers you, I'm sorry, pick up a history book and get to learning.
Absolutely. So, yeah, no U.S. without nullification, no U.S. without secession. known that some things were out of sync, that things didn't make sense. But the more I've read, I'm still learning things that really I should have been taught years ago or should have discovered on my own. But we're deliberately dumbed down. They don't want to use words. They don't want to put nullification in a positive light. They don't want to put secession in a positive light. And so we've been lied to. And the Constitution we have that they all like to trot out every now and then at election time and other times, they're not only not defending it most of the time, they've totally distorted it. Because, I don't see how, without nullification, we don't have the Constitution in practice that we passed.
There is no Constitution. There is no America without nullification and secession. If you don't think that American colonies seceded from the British Empire, you don't know the definition of that word, period. Learn it. You've got to know these things. Many of you claim to have read the Federalist Papers. Well, read numbers 45 and 46, and then go read my book, What Degree of Madness, at westernislandspublishing.com. Go read that book, and it explains James Madison's method to restore sovereignty to the states if we ever let the federal government grow tyrannical. And we did. So now we need the plan that Madison put forth. And Dave, an important thing to remember is the American War for Independence didn't start at Lexington or Concord. It started way back, like you said, with the Stamp Act, right? We refused to be governed by a tyrant. How do we know he was a tyrant? Because he was issuing edicts that violated the English Constitution.
Yep.
So how does that not apply today? Why is it that we went to war with England, but when it's an American despot, we give him a pass if he has our favorite letter after his name? Why? And Madison, in that Federalist 46, says, at the end of the day, I hope our resistance to a domestic tyrant would be just as forceful as our resistance to a British tyrant. Think about that, y'all.
Yeah, good point.
George III, we're going to have to ask forgiveness of George III one of these days.
We always hear that nullification has never been used successfully. Well, obviously it was used successfully then, but what we hear most of the time when we hear nullification in historical context, all we hear about is the nullification crisis of 1832. A couple of things on that. Number one, they're not completely honest about how the background on that and how it was actually successful, but they don't even touch on the earlier uses of nullification after the Constitution. You want to hit those areas a little bit?
You talk about like after the Constitution? Yeah, there were lots of times where the Congress would entertain nullification bills because, well, let's just talk about your tariff bill that you're talking about. It was nullified, right? Because South Carolina said, if this is enforced, we will not, we won't enforce it within the sovereign boundaries of South Carolina. Now, Andrew Jackson said, we'll send troops down there. But guess what? He didn't, because Congress took the teeth out of that nullification bill. So it obviously works.
Right.
Because, and you can look at today. If you go to lots of states in this union, you can buy marijuana at weed stores, all just like you're buying a Coke.
Yep.
You can buy raw milk like you're buying 2% milk, right? You can do all that, and none of these states are being threatened with federal troops. None of them.
Right.
No, obviously, nullification works.
Yep.
Because if it didn't, there'd be federal troops on the border of Arizona and, Idaho, and there aren't.
Well, even in 1832, like you say, they did reach a compromise. Congress compromised. And then the whole thing about Jackson and his force bill, if I recall, didn't South Carolina pass a bill that said, okay, He does that, we'll do this. It's not
That's
like,
my point.
yeah, it's not like he passed a force bill and they were shaking in their shoes and said, okay, we give up. But that's the way
Right.
it's always portrayed. And that's not the case. They actually did get the tariff lowered.
They did. And no one ever teaches that.
Yeah.
No one except the John Birch Society and the good people over at 10th Amendment Center.
Yep.
They lowered the tariff because South Carolina stood up to them. Well, what happens today? Why don't we see? We do see it today. People say, well, if it worked, they'd be doing it today. They are.
Yeah.
Go to Idaho, go to the grocery store. I can't do that in Tennessee. Why? Because we have a tyrannical governor. Simple as that. Simple as that. Because there's nothing empowering him to force us to not drink raw milk. But if I go to Idaho, I can buy it at the grocery store. If I go to Arizona, I can buy weed at a dispensary next door to Circle K.
And this is not just about being able to buy weed. It's just
No.
it's just the point that if states step up on things that are not actual federal powers, and if they don't just crumble, then they can nullify federal
There you
law.
go. There you go.
It doesn't rewrite it; it just nullifies it.
Right. It just says you don't have the authority, so we're not enforcing it.
Yeah.
And find me the authority to outlaw raw milk or marijuana in the Constitution. Now, I'm not in favor of legalized weed in the sense that I don't want to live in that place, but I'm in favor of the states being able to decide.
Right.
I'm 100%, because then those people that want legalized weed will leave Tennessee.
Yeah. Now, the early on in 1798, both Madison and Jefferson, the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. Let's talk about that a little bit.
If your listeners haven't read that by now, I don't know what we've been on this. I've been on your show so many times and promoting
Right.
the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions.
Well, I guess what I want to
Please.
hit on, I guess what I really want to hit is this. We hear all the time that, well, but nobody paid attention to those. Everybody ignored them, and some states disavowed them and criticized them for it. And that was true to some degree, but it was, number one, not totally true. And oh, by the way, some of those same states, didn't they use those as examples when Madison and Jefferson were in office, especially Madison during the War of 1812? I think there were some examples of that.
They sure did. I mean, you had states like Vermont who said, we're not going to participate in the war because Madison doesn't have the authority for this war. Now, he did, but to them, he did not. And they nullified, right? They said, he doesn't have authority. We're not going to do it. And other states wanted to do likewise. We had oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name right now. Starts with an H, a town in Connecticut, where they actually held a little convention
Right.
to say, should we,
Oh, the Hartford Convention. Hartford
there you go,
Convention.
Hartford.
Yeah.
What should we nullify and what shouldn't we nullify? And it doesn't matter that states didn't adopt it. Those were the declaration of those two states.
Right.
If you wanted to do something else, knock yourself out. But Virginia and Kentucky said, here's how and who knows more than Madison? Again, you're asking me to believe you over the Constitution, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
And they explain how the Constitution was written, how it was enforced, and that's it. If you don't agree, tough. They were there and they knew how it was created.
And wasn't part of the issue in New England that with the War of 1812, there were plans to invade Canada? And I think Madison wanted some troops to invade Canada, and some of the northern
That's right.
states were like, hey, wait a minute. Okay, look, we'll provide troops to defend against the British, but we're not sending our troops to invade Canada.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And they also had sweetheart commercial alliances with Canada to England because we had cut off commercial alliance with England. But the northern border states maintained their commercial alliances in defiance of the law with England through Canada. So it was active nullification in their own self-interest, which who cares? If you don't like it, there are other states to move to. This is the point. Vote with your feet. If you don't like it, vote with your feet.
Right.
Simple as that. We don't have to do anything else but worry about our state, the sovereign borders of our state.
Now, the Whiskey Rebellion, we and granted that was not an overseas issue, but we always hear that Washington went in and crushed the Whiskey Rebellion in western Pennsylvania. There's some issues there, but as I understand it, they eventually stopped. They pretty much eventually that tax was nullified in places like western North Carolina and what is now Tennessee and Virginia. In the real backcountry,
that's right.
They were never successful in collecting that tax, and so they eventually decided, hey, you know what? We are wasting our time.
Right. The only one who wanted that push forward was Alexander Hamilton. And he never met a federal authority that he didn't want to usurp. That man wanted the federal government to have authority over everything, right? If he were alive today, I can't imagine. But he was behind the bank, which is unconstitutional. He was behind the Whiskey Rebellion, which is the repeal of which is unconstitutional. Yeah, because it must be for the general welfare, right? It can't be for the welfare of one narrow group. And so, totally unconstitutional. They were right to refuse it. And the people of North Carolina and what is today Tennessee were completely within their rights to refuse to pay.
Yeah. And they didn't. They were never coerced, but we're sold this, Whiskey Rebellion crushed by Washington and western Pennsylvania, as if that was the only place they made liquor. And as if that was the only place, remote area that was going on and that was not paying and did not pay.
That's right. That's right.
So
that's right.
Now, you've written a lot about Madison, and of course, he and Jefferson are all authors, as I mentioned, the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. Mm-hmm. And I think, like you said, we've covered that pretty much. But I did want to bring up a minute ago about the fact that there were some states that did actually support it, and then there were others who clamped onto it after the fact, years down the line. Applying those same principles, which really the Hartford Convention would have been a perfect example of that. Mm-hmm. So some of those states may have condemned it, and a lot of people, that was because we had politics even then, okay? By that time, we already had parties. And so the Federalists were the ruling party at the time.
There you go.
And so that had a lot to do with that. So
I mean, it's an active partisan. We see it right now, right? Now, I'm not in favor of this budget. Please do not get me wrong.
Right.
But we see it now. The Democrats are all against it. The Republicans are for it. Same thing with the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. The fact that it was two Republicans with a large R putting it out meant the Federalists were going to say no, regardless. It could have said the sky is blue and the sun is yellow, and the Federalists, led by John Adams and Alexander Hamilton, would have said, no, the sky is azure and the sun is, orange.
Right.
Period. It wouldn't matter. They would have argued against it simply because of who the authors were. Because like you said, we already had partisanship.
Yeah. Now, another thing I've heard, and I'm sure you know this a whole lot better than I do, Madison supposedly was opposed to Calhoun's understanding of nullification during the nullification crisis of 1832.
Calhoun, a simple answer to that. Madison, in a letter, said that Calhoun's expression of nullification applied only within the sovereign borders of South Carolina. That if Calhoun's idea was South Carolina could nullify on behalf of the Union,
right,
that was wrong. Yeah. And he's right. That is wrong. One state cannot nullify on behalf of the Union. Right. But one state can nullify on behalf of that state, which is, if you read Calhoun at all, which please, go read Calhoun's statements, and you'll see that what he said was completely constitutional, completely right.
Okay, what Calhoun said or what Madison said?
Well, what Calhoun said.
Okay.
Yeah, what Calhoun said. Because Calhoun didn't have the notion of applying that throughout the Union.
Okay, so it was not, because I'd read somewhere that his idea was, okay, if South Carolina nullifies it, that it's therefore nullified unless the remainder of the states held some sort of convention. Was that all made up?
That's not what he said. Go read the document for yourself, the exposition on nullification, and you'll see that he said nothing of the sort.
Okay.
He wanted to nullify it within the sovereign borders of South Carolina. What North Carolina did, what Georgia did, what Virginia did was none of his concern.
Okay. Now,
Madison was saying that the Calhoun version of nullification does not apply to the entire Union. And he was right. It doesn't.
Okay.
But that's not what Calhoun was saying.
Okay. Did Madison ever renounce the idea of nullification?
No, not at all. No, not at all. He renounced the Calhoun's version of nullification being applied to the Union and then requiring the states of the Union, to positively say, oh, we want to accept it or we don't. No, that's not it.
Okay, but you said Calhoun didn't make that claim.
No, he didn't.
Where does that come from? Because I know you've heard that as well. Where did that come from?
The people wanting to malign Calhoun. Simple as
that.
that.
At the time.
That's right, because he was not, if not exactly as hated as Jefferson and Madison, at least as, close.
Wow. Okay.
He was a figure that the people in power didn't like.
Because he was pretty much stuck to the truth and to the Constitution.
Oh my gosh. Read the footbill. Read the exposition. Get that volume that Liberty Fund sells.
Right.
The collected works of Calhoun. Educate yourself. Simple as $20. $20 from Liberty Fund.
Okay.
Simple as that.
Okay. So another thing that happens is a lot of people, because all we ever get referred to is the nullification in South Carolina, and we've already really answered this. I just want to kind of re-emphasize it a little bit. Well, it's a Southern thing. Well, it's not a Southern thing.
No, it began in the North.
Yeah, it began in the North, and really,
I mean, I don't think anyone would call Massachusetts the South.
No.
Stamp Act nullification started there.
Right.
I don't think you'd consider Hartford, Connecticut the South.
No.
The Hartford Convention happened there.
Yeah. And wasn't there somebody from the Northeast, may have been Massachusetts, I'm not sure, early on, like 1794, that was talking about possibly seceding?
Yeah. They did. Connecticut was going around trying to get people to agree to a secession bill. And I don't think that was New York, Connecticut. I don't think anyone considered those southern states. But again, Dave, it's the ignorance, and it gets right back to where you started, that we've been purposefully kept ignorant. Purposefully. Yeah. We send our schools to indoctrination camps, and they get indoctrinated. Period.
Yep.
That's it. And so when they come home, sadly, we don't know enough to deprogram them.
Yeah, that's true.
So how are you going to deprogram someone? You don't know the facts yourself.
Yeah.
You haven't read the Helvidius letters. You haven't read the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. You haven't read the words of Calhoun. How are you going to correct those mistakes if you're ignorant too?
Yeah. And a lot of those things I never even heard of, or I may have seen them mentioned in a school book, but they never went in anything I've learned for the most part about the Constitution. For the most part, I've learned on my own. Obviously, I still got a lot more to learn, but and I think it's the same way across the board. Most of the people that know anything about the Constitution, especially if they're a lawyer, I mean, when you went to law school, what did they teach you about the Constitution?
Oh, just, that was the thing. I got in trouble, and some of my classmates can vouch for this, because in our con law class, we never opened the Constitution, not once. And so after a few days, I was like, hey, prof, are we going to ever look at the Constitution in our constitutional law class? And she was like, no, because it doesn't matter. What matters is what the Supreme Court says it means.
Where's that in the Constitution? Can you...
It isn't. And so many of my classmates were like, just shut up and let's get through the class.
Yeah.
That's what their attitude. Shut up and let's get through this. And my idea was, well, guess I'm going to just have to keep relying on my own education then.
Yeah. And now they're out there, all of them, and this is the majority of lawyers, promoting that, well, it just matters what the Supreme Court says. The rest of this doesn't matter. This is all that matters.
Although, Dave, now this is curious. We were taught a legal maxim that says if you make a list of something in a document and you leave something off that list, that thing was left off on purpose.
Okay.
In Article 6, when it lists these are the supreme law of the land, it does not list Supreme Court opinions.
Right. And they are opinions.
Opinions.
Yeah.
But we don't see it there, so it was left off on purpose, a principle we were taught in law school.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I've never talked to any lawyer that said they really learned anything about the Constitution in con law.
Nope.
They just they learn about precedent and they learn about case law.
I just took notes to get an A and recognized that we weren't going to study the Constitution.
Yeah.
But fortunately, I had already been put on the path of my own education, and I had already, knew better than the con law professor.
Right.
Because my freshman year of college, as I explained in Founder's Recipe, he put me on that path to my own education. And that's what I did. I just educated myself.
And so I think we already said that, in our view, the Constitution can't work properly without nullification. The founders anticipated it, and it can't work properly without it. Just like any law that's passed, if you don't enforce it, it's not worth the paper that's written on. Well, same thing with the Constitution. If the people don't enforce the limits on the government, it's worthless.
There are no limits. Well, Montesquieu said that it's our sad experience that any power in government will continue to push the boundaries of its power until it comes up against some limit. That's from his Spirit of the Laws book 1. That if government doesn't come up against a limit, they will continue to expand the boundaries of its authority. Well, they're not coming up against any limit.
No.
Because the states have just decided to be vassal states of the federal empire. Simple as that.
Yep.
We have tyrannical government in our state, sadly.
Yeah, we do. Absolutely.
But it's true.
Yeah.
But it's true.
Yeah.
We don't have a people educated enough to do anything about that.
Yeah. And them trying to push for more power is human nature, and I guess it's human nature to some degree for most people to, go along to get along. And then of course it just gets worse when you do that.
Right.
And I don't see how our country can be restored without nullification. I mean, DC will not fix DC.
No, period. It cannot, Dave. If that's in somebody's head that we're going to fix this by, writing letters to their congressman, you've lost your mind, because that's not going to happen. Nobody learn, people. The founding fathers, quoted Montesquieu all the time. Why? Because they read him. If you haven't read Spirit of the Laws, at least get my book, The Founder's Recipe, and read a selection of the stuff that informed our founders. Yeah.
And I do have that book, by the way, and it is a good book, but I do need to reread it.
They would be rolling over in their graves, the founding fathers, at the notion that we buy light bulbs according to a federal standard. No, sir. Yeah. They wouldn't believe that we continue to fund such a tyrannical government.
Yeah. I think we're pretty much we're getting ready to celebrate the 250th, as I said, but I think we're pretty much a disgrace to that generation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You testified in support of a nullification process bill a couple years ago, which that is going to be in committee tomorrow. And we'll talk about, well, it's going to be in the Senate committee. It's already made it through the House, which the House has not been the problem so much. The Senate's been the problem, and we'll see how that goes tomorrow. And I'll talk about that more later on in the show. If there's anything that you would reiterate to that committee, and of course this was the process bill about nullification that you testified, you and Jeff Cobble, two of the maybe, there might be 5 of you in the state that actually have any real knowledge of and respect for the Constitution.
I appreciate you saying that.
And but you did testify. Is there anything that you would, if you could talk to those legislators, anything that you would say?
Well, first of all, I'd say resign. That's the first thing I'd say. Second thing I'd say was every one of y'all put your hand on the Bible and swore to God to be faithful to the U.S. and Tennessee Constitution. Well, every one of you now have called God down as a witness on your lying. So that's not going to be good for you, because you should have just refused to do that because the Constitution doesn't require it, and you should have not done it, because I'd rather not do it than call God as a witness to my perfidy. I would rather not have that happen. Third thing I would say is, for the love of all that's holy, read the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. Just sit down tonight and read them. And don't dismiss them. Don't dismiss them as the product of Jefferson. Of course don't dismiss them. Read them. And then if you have time tonight, read Calhoun in his own words, right? Read Calhoun in his own words. You can find that all on Online Library of Liberty, right? Read Calhoun in his own words, Kentucky and Virginia, and then read, I think that's enough.
Yeah.
Read Federalist 45 and 46. Surely you owe it to your constituents to do that little bit of reading before you cast a vote that might be in violation of the oath you swore to God.
Right. And of course, this is just a process bill. I mean, they have the right to nullify. This just creates, because they've shown us that they did nullify something in theory a couple of years ago on their own.
That's right.
But since then, they act like it's a dirty word. They're hiding behind the AG's opinion.
What they're doing is they're using Tennessee as a springboard to federal authority. These people have D.C. in their eyes. They've caught what I call Potomac fever. They want to be congressmen, senators, whatever else. They've got Potomac fever. They want to be up there in those marble palaces of power. And so what they do in Tennessee has to go over well with the national party that they serve. Yeah. Whatever party you serve, you better serve them well if you want to take that next step.
Yeah. Or if you just want to stay in their good graces, even if you don't want to go to D.C.
Right.
Yeah.
Either way, if you want to keep your prime position at the trough.
Right. Yeah.
You want to keep your prime position, you better play ball.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts?
No, sir. I would just say I'm glad you asked me. Read those things. Legislators, please do that for your constituents.
Absolutely.
Please pray. Please ask God to guide your thoughts, because I know that He knows that the principles laid out in the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, in Federalist 45 and 46, are true principles. Read those things, make it happen.
Absolutely. And we've got your website that we're going to pop up there real quick. Anything you want to say on that?
I would, if you pull up westernislandspublishing.com, that's where you can get all the books that I mentioned tonight. You can get them at westernislandspublishing.com.
Okay.
I don't know if you can pull it up there or not. I don't know. Either way, it's fine. westernislandspublishing.com.
Okay.
And you click on me as a featured author. All my books are there.
Okay. Any upcoming events that you need to talk about, to let everybody know about?
No, sir. I'm not going to be traveling for a while, so I'm just going to be sitting here doing webinars and podcast interviews. So, nope, nothing big that I am ready to announce yet.
All righty. Well, hey, once again, thanks for coming on. Appreciate what you do. Appreciate all the effort you put into educating people on this over the years. And
Yes,
we'll
sir.
definitely have you back on if you're willing to come on.
I'm always willing, Dave, to preach the truth here in my home state.
Well, hey, thank you. Thank you very much. And you have a good
Thank
night.
you, Dave. Dave, seriously, thank you, brother, for keeping at it. Even when it may seem easier not to, thank you for keeping at it, sir.
Well, appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
You have a good
All right.
night.
You too, brother. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you. Hey, don't go away. We've got some information. There's a lot of things to pass on here to the audience. A lot going on this week in the General Assembly, and here are just some of the bills you need to be aware of. And the first one has to do with nullification. The good news is House Bill 2610 that's the nullification bill in the House, is going to Calendar Rules Committee for scheduling. Now, in the past, the House has not been the problem. It's been the Senate. Imagine that. Anyway, and so the bill, of course, enacts the Restoring State Sovereignty Through Nullification Act, establishes processes by which the General Assembly may nullify an unconstitutional federal statute, regulation, agency, order, or an executive order, and includes a court opinion as well. Now, these are processes, and ultimately, with all these processes, with the exception of the executive order, which the governor can already do an executive order. If he were to get something came down from D.C. and he's like, hey, that's not constitutional. If he had the backbone, he could already do an executive order and order the executive branch not to cooperate. And if our state legislature had an issue with that, then, they could deal with that. But he can already do that. What this bill does, it allows, that existing process. You have a judge in a court that could say, hey, wait a minute, this is not right. Now, eventually, that would still have to be decided by our legislature, just as the other three cases, the other three processes. And one of the first processes is, normally we use a committee system. If a legislator wants to get a bill through, he has to go through the committee process. And then if he gets through the committee, then it gets to the floor and it gets a vote. Normally, bills live or die in committee. If it makes it to the floor of either house, it's normally going to pass. Normally, but not always. Well, all this does is, okay, if there's a legislator out there who thinks, hey, this is unconstitutional, instead of having to go through the committee process and have it killed, he submits it to the Speaker of the House, and there's so many days before they have to look at it and take a vote on it. They still will ultimately decide. The legislature will ultimately decide. This is not going to force nullification. It is going to force a focus on acts of the federal government that we believe are unconstitutional. But ultimately, the legislature will decide. They will decide in the other example, which is, I think it's 10 municipalities or counties that decide, hey, you know what? We think this is unconstitutional. Same thing. That would be submitted to the Speaker of the House. It would be heard by the full House and Senate. They would agree, hey, yeah, this is unconstitutional, and we're going to do X, Y, or Z. They ultimately decide whether or not they think it's constitutional and what to do about it. It's not as if this one legislator who submits this gets to decide, or the 10 counties get to decide. And then the last example is 2,000 registered voters across the state could bring something. Once again, it would be heard in the legislature. It wouldn't have to go through a committee, but once again, they would ultimately decide. So it's basically it's creating processes. It's not a vote on nullification, legal or illegal. Our state's already done nullification. They did it in 2021. And most of the people that are fighting it now, matter of fact, almost all the people that are fighting it now signed on to it in 2021. And this was back during COVID. So a lot of them are hypocritical about this. But this is an important bill. And so the Senate version by Senator Bowling, Senate Bill 2657, it'll be in the Senate State and Local Government Committee tomorrow. It's scheduled for Senate Meeting Room 1 at 10:30. It's number 20 on the calendar. That could change. I mean, they could yank it off of there. They could move it up. They could move it back. You never know what's going to happen. But we need to call the members of the committee and or email. Tell them to support this legislation. The bill will be heard tomorrow. Like I say, starts at 10:30. All the bills in that committee start at 10:30. This bill is number 20, so who knows what time it'll actually be heard. Call in the morning. Call Senator Briggs, 615-741-1766. Guys, these numbers, I'm going to go over them, but you can find this they're on the screen. You can find them on Tennessee, tncss.weebly.com, or you can find them on Tennessee Stands. Yeah, and we will also post them on our Facebook page. So Senator Kyle, 615-741-4167. Hey, there's like 2 Democrats on there. If this fails, it won't be because of the Democrats, all right? The Republicans are the ones who are going to make or break this. Senator Lowe, 615-741-1946. Senator Hatcher, 615-741-0981. Senator Gardenhire, 615-741-6682. Senator Jackson, 615-741-1810. Senator Wiley, who, by the way, when this bill came through committee a couple years ago, he said he was ready to vote for it, and he is hopefully going to be the guy who gives this bill a second tomorrow. 615-714-2368. Senator Roberts, 615-741-4499. And Senator Yarborough, the other Democrat, 615-741-3291. Hey, just for future reference, anything at the Capitol is 615-741 and then whatever the last 4 is. And here's a little script for you to use. Hello, my name is, whatever your name is. Call in today to ask Senator so-and-so to vote yes for Senate Bill 2657, Restoring State Sovereignty through Nullification Act, on March 24th when it is heard before the Senate, State, and Local Government Committee. So you got time to call them. Thank them. Be nice to them, especially if the secretary answers. Be nice to her or him. If you're rude with their secretaries, things go downhill real quick. So just keep that in mind. And so make the calls. You got time in the morning to do that. Send emails. TNCSS was a website started by Karen Bracken for the purpose of getting this legislation passed. Now, over time, some things have been added, but they're all based on the issue of state sovereignty. And so that's a great website. If you don't know anything about nullification, if you don't know much about our history or about our Constitution, that's a great site to go to and read. There's a lot of good information. And also, they have an email script on there. So if you don't want to call, actually, we'd like for you to call and email, but all of that information is on that website. If you go to the tncs.weebly.com, and there's a Substack. If you subscribe to the Substack, you'll get updated information on this. Now, hopefully, it passes tomorrow. There's a possibility it could get rolled, which means they push it back a week. But we're getting late in the session. They don't want to be here a whole lot longer. I know they plan on getting out in April, so there's not a lot of room, not a lot of time for bills to get rolled. Okay, but go to tncss.weebly.com, sign up for the Substack. There's other bills as well to keep up with. Now, tomorrow, Senate Bill 1958 and House Bill 1971. We've talked about this, and both of these, when I looked on the site yesterday, were scheduled for earlier today. But I'm not sure of the status. I looked a little while before the show. I'm going to pull it up real quick and see if I can find anything on this, because this is the bill that's designed to take away your ability to do a facial challenge to state law that's unconstitutional. And I'm going to see if I can find an update on this, because I couldn't see anything on it earlier. And hopefully it's updated. Okay, House Bill 1971 by Farmer. Okay, it said it was on the Judiciary Committee for today, all right? And that's what I was tracking, but I don't see the votes on it for today. I see votes from earlier in the session. And let me see if I've got anything on the Senate bill. Senate bill, I still see where it failed on the 17th, but we know that they're going to revive it. It failed in committee, but it was not. It failed, but it wasn't defeated. We know they're going to bring that back. So for whatever reason, I can't find it. If there's somebody in the chat room that knows the status of this bill, House Bill 1971 or Senate Bill 1958, go ahead and text us, and we'll try to get that information out to you if you can get it to us before we end the show. But those are critical bills. They're trying to, our state is trying to remove our ability to sue over unconstitutional legislation. So that's we can't trust them at the state level either, unfortunately. All right, there's other important bills in the week. This week, like I said, anything having to do with state sovereignty, go to tncss.weebly.com. Anything election related, fair election integrity, go to tnfairelections.org. Tennessee Firearms Association, anything gun related, Second Amendment or Section 26 of the state constitution. Tennessee Stands and Tennessee Eagle Forum are great for all the many other categories of bills. They got great information. Go to those sites. freeyourchildren.com for more information on pending legislation having to do with homeschool and parental rights. I want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch our program tonight. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, so please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons as well as the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And before I say anything else, so that I don't forget, I have a special guest in the studio tonight, and I just want to say happy birthday to my mom, who's 80 years young today. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you so much, and happy birthday. Anyway, I appreciate everybody's support. Our goal is to have 1,000 subscribers. We're about just a little bit less than 60 shy. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and share us with your friends. Check out our audio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, teeninformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. The Stewart Henry County chapter of the Tennessee Firearms Association will meet for a special event Tuesday, March 31st, 7 p.m. at the Stewart County Visitor Center, 117 Visitor Center Lane off Donaldson Parkway, which is Highway 79 in Dover, Tennessee. Our featured speaker is Tiffany Boyd, former tenured public school teacher, founder of Free Your Children, which seeks to equip citizens to defend parental and educational rights through Christian discipleship and constitutional advocacy. She's an education consultant, podcast host, and education researcher. She is a monthly contributor to the Murfreesboro Pulse. Her work has been featured in the Daily Wire, Liberty Sentinel, WorldNet Daily, WSMVW in Nashville, the Christian Post, and the Blaze. So that's a week from tomorrow night in Dover, 7 p.m. You don't have to be a member. Everybody's welcome to come. This Wednesday, join us at 8 p.m. for a special guest, Ron Messer, a.k.a. Sergeant Major Grizzle Grits, here to tell his story about his ministry, Grizzly Army Ministries. The show will also include a legislative update. Join us next Monday, March 30th at 7 p.m. when our guest will be attorney and constitutional expert Jeff Cobble, here to discuss all that is wrong with the 14th Amendment and the damage it has done to the founders. And a lot of that has to do with the perversion of the 14th Amendment by the court. We'll get heavy into that. Please take the time to check out our other shows brought to you by West Tennessee TV by going to westtennesseetv.com or myparishtv.com. You can find links to the Mike Weatherford Show and Sportscast with Jeremy Buckaloo. Coming up tomorrow night on the Mike Weatherford Show, Mike welcomes live into the studio up-and-coming Canadian singer-songwriter Shelley Lynch with songs and stories from the road. You don't want to miss this entertaining episode. Thanks again for tuning in tonight, and we'll see you again this coming Wednesday. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.